BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS has been the gateway to your IAS prep. Our YouTube channel is going to get even better from 2023. Starting 2nd January, the Hindu newspaper analysis will be conducted live every day at 10 a.m. by your beloved faculties. Not only this, we have a whole new set of initiatives lined up for the new year to help you clear this prestigious exam. So subscribe to our YouTube channel now and give wings to your civil services dream. Hello and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep. Welcome to the 100th episode of International Relations This week. This session is particularly special for us because it marks the 100th episode of IR this week. So we would like to know your response. If you have been benefiting from this initiative, do let us know by sharing your comments, like the video, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. And also I'm sure you would have seen the promo at the start of this video. As we draw 2022 to an end, we are glad to announce a major revamp of our YouTube channel. Starting next year, we have a host of new initiatives being launched to help you prepare for this prestigious exam. The Hindu analysis, which is a widely appreciated video on our channel, will be going live from the 2nd of January. So do subscribe to our channel, stay tuned for a number of initiatives on current affairs, because our objective here is to make this a one-stop solution for your current affairs preparation. So with this, let's start with today's discussion by looking at the topics that we are going to cover. We have 4 important geopolitical developments that are lined up for today's session. Based on the developments of last 1 week, we will analyze these topics and see how they are relevant for the exam, how they impact India's national interests. First, we are going to talk about former Prime Minister Vajpayee and his contribution to India's foreign policy. Specifically, we look at his role in normalizing India-China relations. It's a very, very important discussion considering the state of India-China relations today. After this, we'll talk about a development in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Ukrainian President Zelenskyy has proposed a 10-point peace plan, which has been making a lot of news over the last 1 week. So we shall cover this topic in detail, and then we'll move to a neighboring country, that is Nepal. Nepal recently witnessed elections, and Prachanda has been sworn in as the Prime Minister of Nepal. It's a very big development in our neighborhood, and hence we have to talk about this in complete detail. Then finally, we'll take a look at Afghanistan, where the Taliban has continued to oppress women, and hence we'll have a detailed discussion on how Taliban has treated women in the country and how Taliban is known to violate gender rights and human rights in Afghanistan. So these are the important topics that we have lined up for today. So please stay tuned for the next 40-45 minutes for a detailed discussion on all these topics. But before we begin, don't forget to press the like button, share your comments once the stream ends, and do subscribe to our channel. So let's start with the first topic. First, you need to understand the context here. Why are we talking about former Prime Minister Vajpayee? The reason is the 25th of December marks the birth anniversary of former Prime Minister Vajpayee, who was regarded widely as a statesman, as someone who steered India during very difficult geopolitical times. And as a result, this day is marked as the National Good Governance Day. So since we have marked the 25th of December as Vajpayee's birth anniversary and the Good Governance Day last week, it becomes relevant here to talk about his contribution to India's foreign policy. We will limit our discussion to Vajpayee's role in improving India-China relations. Because when it comes to India-China relations, Prime Minister Vajpayee played a critical role. So we need to understand this in slight detail. I'm sure you know that the current state of relations between India-China is not normal. There are high tensions between the two countries over the last 2 years. Multiple clashes have taken place over the border disputes, and both the countries are involved in this strategic conflict all across the Indo-Pacific. So given the state of India-China relations today, especially the nature of the border dispute, it becomes very important to talk about the contribution of former Prime Minister Vajpayee to Indian diplomacy, especially in improving India's ties with China. So I would like to take you back all the way to 1979, when Atal Bihari Vajpayee was the foreign minister of India under the Morarji Desai government. The year was 1979. In 1962, India-China had fought the first war over their border dispute. Following the India-China War of 1962, relations between the two countries had completely broken down. The border dispute was the dominating factor of the relationship, and considering the conflict, the relationship had completely fallen apart, and this was normalized during Vajpayee's visit to China. This was a historic visit in the year 1979. Here I have shared a clipping from the Indian Express dated to 1979. It marks how India-China border issue was unfrozen following the visit of then Foreign Minister Vajpayee to China. This was a landmark event in India-China relations. Essentially, the relationship which had been frozen, which had completely fallen apart after the 62 war, was defrozen. There was a thaw in the relationship. The tensions were brought down and an understanding was reached between the two sides following this historic visit of then Foreign Minister Vajpayee. Under the Morarji Desai government, there was a new outreach from India towards China to normalize the relations. Because China being one of India's largest neighbors, there was no way India could ignore China. So to repair this relationship, to normalize the ties, Foreign Minister Vajpayee paid an important visit and met with the top leaders of China, including then Chinese Premier and as well as the Vice Premier Deng Xiaoping. Later, Deng Xiaoping would go on to become the Premier as well. So these bonds, these relations which were built between the top leaders of the two countries would play an important role in normalizing the relations between India and China. On this foundation, Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi would build upon it, and Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi would carry out a historic visit to China in 1988, which would lay the foundation for a new relationship between the two countries. This was taken forward by P.V. Narasimha Rao in the 1990s. And as a result, we signed important border agreements in 1993 and in 1996. In 1993, India-China signed the Peace and Tranquility Agreement, through which they committed to maintain peace and tranquility along the line of actual control. In 1996, we signed the Confidence Building Measures Agreement to promote confidence on both the sides, to prevent any unnecessary clashes and disputes at the LAC. These two agreements have been pivotal in preventing tensions between the two sides. These two agreements have helped India-China to prevent the escalation of small disputes into a bigger conflict in the last 30 years. So the foundation for this was laid in 1979 when then Foreign Minister Vajpayee visited China. The successive leaders, including Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi, Narasimha Rao, they would build upon this and establish a new era in India-China relations. So this was one key contribution of Vajpayee, but the real turning point was in the year 2003 when Vajpayee was the Prime Minister of India and then he paid an important visit to China. This would be his second official visit, but now he was returning to China as the Prime Minister of India. During this visit as well, there were a number of important achievements. So I would like to take you through these developments, these historical developments, because it's very important to understand these events. Considering the current state of relations, it's important to know the background, the history, so that you would be able to analyze and appreciate the current state of relations between the two countries. So during this visit in 2003, Prime Minister Vajpayee succeeded in bringing the two countries much closer. Now please remember, the 1990s was a very difficult period for India, especially the late 1990s. On one hand, we had fought a war with Pakistan, the Kargil War. There were many major terror attacks against India during that period. India-Pakistan tensions had gone up. And around the same period, India tested nuclear weapons as well at Pokhran in 1998. And thus, India was being targeted by various countries, including US, China, and others. India was placed under sanctions for testing nuclear weapons. Since India's nuclear weapons program was primarily targeted at China, now since India had built a nuclear deterrent against China, China was very unhappy with India's nuclear tests. So this visit, which happened in 2003, was of great importance because it came after the nuclear tests, and the nuclear test had happened under Prime Minister Vajpayee. So now the same leader was traveling to China seeking a friendly relationship. So this was a critical juncture in the India-China relations, but Prime Minister Vajpayee, being a statesman, he managed to negotiate with the Chinese leaders, the Chinese government, and provided for normalization of India-China relations. The achievements of Rajiv Gandhi and Narasimha Rao were taken forward by Prime Minister Vajpayee after the border agreements had been signed in 93 and 96. Fresh agreements were signed in many areas which really brought India-China closer. Now, if you evaluate the entire India-China relations from 1950 till date, the best period for India-China relations was 2000 to 2010. This decade saw the flourishing of India-China relations. Both were large Asian countries with fast-growing economies. The two countries could not ignore each other. They had to keep aside their tensions, their border disputes, and collaborate and work together as emerging developing economies. So Prime Minister Vajpayee would capitalize on this and ensure that many key agreements were signed with the Chinese. Both the sides agreed during this visit to respect and uphold the border agreements that were signed in 1993 and 1996. They agreed to maintain peace and tranquility as they had committed to under the 93 agreement and ensure that they wouldn't escalate tensions along the disputed border, that is along the line of actual control. This agreement between India and China led to the establishment of a very, very important process called the SR mechanism, or the Special Representative Mechanism. Both the sides agreed to appoint their special representatives. That is, the Indian Prime Minister would appoint his special representative, who would act as the Indian envoy. The Chinese Premier, the Chinese President, would appoint his special representative to act as the Chinese envoy. This platform, the Special Representative Mechanism platform, would focus on working out a political solution for the border dispute. This was the mandate of the SR mechanism. The SR mechanism was an outcome of Prime Minister Vajpayee's historic visit in 2003 to China. Through this platform, the Indian and Chinese special representatives would meet regularly to discuss the border issues, to discuss the differing perceptions they had about the border, and solve these issues politically to work out a viable political solution. Now, this was a very big change because for the first time, the two sides were committing that without escalating military tensions, without getting into wars and conflicts, they were committing to resolve this border issue through talks and negotiations. The focus here was to work out a political settlement, to politically come out with a solution to settle the border dispute forever. So India would appoint the National Security Advisor as the special representative. China would appoint the State Counselor, who is the equivalent of India's NSA, as the special representative of China. So the NSA of India and the State Counselor of China, they would meet regularly over the coming years. They have held around 22 rounds of talks until 2020 and especially until 2010, from 2003 to 2010. The SR mechanism did make a lot of progress in getting closer to a settlement, in getting closer to a deal which could have settled the border dispute. But after 2010, China's behavior started changing towards India. As India got closer to the US, as India started importing more weapons from the US, and as India started joining military alliances and started taking part in military exercises with US, China would step up its aggression against India, and since then, India-China relations have taken the downhill road. But this period from 2003 to 2010 was a golden period for the relationship because both the sides were seriously taking this commitment and they were trying to negotiate the border dispute to work out a political solution. Now, I'm stressing on this mechanism, the SR mechanism, because even during the recent Galwan clashes, when the Galwan River Valley clashes took place in 2020, when tensions were extremely high, when it appeared that almost India and China were going to war, the SR mechanism was reactivated by both the governments. The Modi government and Xi Jinping's government in China. They would reactivate the SR platform, the SR mechanism. India's NSA would again negotiate with the State Council of China, and this is how they began the disengagement process at Ladakh. After the Galwan clashes, soldiers had been killed on both the sides. Both the sides, soldiers had been killed following these clashes in Ladakh, and tensions had really escalated. So India-China reactivated the special representative mechanism, the same platform which had been created under the Vajpayee government, and following these talks between the special representatives, a disengagement process was worked out. This led to many rounds of negotiations between senior military commanders, which finally led to disengagement at several sectors in Ladakh where the clashes had taken place. That's one reason why the SR mechanism is important. So here UPSC can ask you a very basic, simple question. What is the SR mechanism? There could be a prelims question as well. SR mechanism is part of India's ties with which country? It's part of India-China relations. It's a platform for working out a political solution to settle the border dispute. The other big achievement during this visit was that India would recognize Tibet as an integral part of China, and in return, China would recognize Sikkim as an integral part of India. This was another landmark development that happened. Until then, India had not formally recognized Tibet as part of PRC. There was always that question mark on India's position regarding Tibet. Similarly, China had refused to accept the integration of Sikkim into the Indian Union, which happened in 1970s. In fact, there's a lot of controversy surrounding the merger of Sikkim with the Indian Union. There are allegations that India engineered a crisis which forced Sikkim to merge with India. Based on these allegations, China refused to recognize Sikkim as a part of India. Now, this is crucial for us because Sikkim became a border state for India, a state that would share borders with China. And there are strategic locations along the Sikkim-Tibet border. You have important locations like the Nathula Pass, Doklam, which is present in Bhutan. These are strategic locations from India's point of view as far as the border dispute is concerned. So China not recognizing Sikkim as a part of India was a major problem for India. China also expected that India should recognize Tibet as an integral part of the PRC. So both the sides came to this understanding where India recognized Tibet formally as part of PRC and China returned the favor by recognizing Sikkim as an integral part of the Indian Union. This allowed India to reopen the strategic Nathula Pass in the year 2006. Nathula Pass in Sikkim is of great strategic and cultural and economic significance. Nathula Pass is one of the routes through which Indian civilization has been connected with Tibet and with the Chinese civilization. This is a historical connection. Centuries ago, it is through Nathula Pass that trade was taking place, exchange of ideology was taking place. Buddhism would travel from India towards Tibet and further towards China. Nathula Pass has always been a major trading route, and the place known as Canggu in Sikkim has always been an important border trade market. Even today, Nathula Pass is a route for Kailash Manasarovar Yatra. Mount Kailash, which is located in Tibet, which is a sacred pilgrimage for Hindus. One of the routes through which Mount Kailash can be accessed is through Nathula Pass in Sikkim. This critical pass had been shut in 1960s following clashes between India and China. It was not reopened as China was refusing to recognize Sikkim as a part of India. Both sides had accumulated troops near Nathula and the pass had been shut. After 40 years, in 2006, Nathula Pass was reopened after China recognized Sikkim as a part of India. This was a historic development because it would resume border trade. It would revive border trade, which is crucial for the border villages. It would allow India to access Mount Kailash and continue Kailash Manasarovar Yatra to the Nathula Pass. It would also help India-China to set up a border meeting point at Nathula to regularly engage with the troops of both the sides to build trust between them. This pass was shut again when the Doklam crisis took place in 2017. So this important development took place following the visit of Prime Minister Vajpayee. Along with that, many key agreements were signed during the 2003 visit. Agreements in the field of trade, education, cultural relations, visa process, visa liberalization. All these agreements were also signed, thereby bringing India closer to China. So if India-China relations could be normalized during this decade, that is between 2003 and 2010, much of the credit goes to then Prime Minister Vajpayee. And that's one reason why even China paid tribute to Prime Minister Vajpayee when he passed away in 2018. Here I've shared a clip which has been taken from CGTN, the China Global Television Network. This is China's state-run English news channel. It's run by the Communist Party, by the People's Republic of China. It's a government-owned news channel. So CGTN published a dedicated article when Vajpayee passed away and paid tribute to his contribution to India-China relations. So this goes on to show the role that Vajpayee had played in repairing and normalizing India-China relations. So this understanding will be very helpful in gaining a new perspective, a new insight into India-China tensions today. So that is why I've taken up this topic and tried to discuss this in as much detail as possible. Now let's move to the second topic. We'll talk about the Russia-Ukraine war. There has been an important development because Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has proposed a 10-point peace plan and he has been pushing it with world leaders. Zelenskyy proposed this 10-point peace plan to end the war during the G20 summit that took place in Bali last month in November. When the G20 summit took place in Bali, where India took over the presidency of G20, that is when Zelenskyy brought up this proposal. He proposed 10 points through which a peace settlement could be worked out between Russia and Ukraine, and this would require the help of the global powers. So since the last 1 month, Zelenskyy has been lobbying with world leaders. He has been approaching all the top leaders, including US President Joe Biden. He has spoken to many European leaders, Japanese leaders, Australia and many other countries. He has even reached out to India a couple of days back. That is why the topic is in news. A couple of days back, Zelenskyy reached out to Prime Minister Modi. You can see his tweet over here. This is the screenshot of his tweet where he thanked Prime Minister Modi and he urged India to back the 10-point peace plan so that the Russia-Ukraine war could be brought to an end. So Ukraine is seeking India's support as well, along with seeking support from many other top global powers. So in this context, it becomes important to understand what is the 10-point peace plan. What is Ukraine proposing? What areas does Ukraine want to work on, and how does it plan to achieve a peace settlement with Russia? Ukraine's agenda is that it wants to promote this 10-point peace plan and push for a global peace summit. Ukraine wants to bring Russia to the negotiating table along with key global powers such as US, European countries, India, Japan, and of course China and many others. So Zelenskyy wants a global peace summit to take place where the Russia-Ukraine war will be discussed and this 10-point peace plan will be implemented. So under this 10-point peace plan, the first goal is to ensure radiation and nuclear safety at the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, which has been at the center of the conflict. Russia has more or less occupied these areas where the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant is located. In our previous sessions, we have discussed the importance of this. We have discussed the risk associated with the clashes which are taking place around the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. Any mistake, any accident here could easily result in a nuclear disaster, thereby risking the entire region and beyond. So Zelenskyy is leveraging the global attention on Zaporozhye nuclear power plant because there is a risk of a nuclear disaster here, and he's trying to leverage this to put pressure on Russia, and he wants a commitment from Russia through which the nuclear safety of the plant can be ensured. And Zelenskyy wants support from other countries to enforce this upon Russia. So that is why he is pushing for a global peace summit to take place. The second point here is food security, because food supplies have been disrupted since the war began. Both Russia and Ukraine are major producers of wheat, barley, corn, sunflower oil, etc. So the disruption in food supplies has affected poor countries, especially African nations. It's leading to hunger and food insecurity around the world. Commodity prices have shot up. So Ukraine is trying to leverage this as well, and it is seeking a global solution through which the war can be brought to an end and thus ensure food security, ensure that food supplies continue from Russia and Ukraine. Third is energy security, because energy supplies from Russia and also from Ukraine has been at the very center of this conflict. So Ukraine wants a global solution here to stabilize the energy prices, the global energy supplies, and ensure that the global energy security is protected, along with restoring Ukraine's power infrastructure, which has been damaged and destroyed by Russian attacks. Russia has deliberately targeted the critical infrastructure of Ukraine. It has destroyed power grids, power transmission lines. So this has had a huge economic cost on Ukraine. So Ukraine wants to rebuild its power infrastructure by putting a halt to these Russian attacks. So this is the third agenda. The fourth point is to ensure the release of POWs, the prisoners of war, the prisoners who have been captured on both the sides. They have to be released and exchanged in a humanitarian manner by respecting the terms of Geneva Convention. The POWs will have to be released and exchanged, and that is one of the important goals of the 10-point peace plan. Next, the fifth one is to restore Ukraine's territorial integrity. Since Russia has annexed a large part of Ukrainian territory against the principles of the UN Charter, Russia has even declared them as independent regions. I am talking about the Donetsk and Luhansk provinces, where Russia had sponsored a rebellion, a separatist rebellion, and in the course of the war, Russia has annexed these territories. It even held a referendum. An election was held, and Russia has even declared it as independent. Russia has even passed a law to merge these areas, Donetsk, Luhansk areas, with Russia. Right? So Russia has captured large part of Ukrainian territory, and Ukraine wants this to be restored because this was done against the principles of the UN Charter. According to UN Charter, no country can violate the sovereignty of the other country with force. So Ukraine wants the integrity of its territory to be restored, and this requires global action. That is why Zelenskyy has been pushing for a global peace summit. Next, Ukraine wants a withdrawal of Russian troops. Ukraine wants a ceasefire to be called immediately and a complete withdrawal of Russian troops. The next point here is to secure justice, to ensure that war criminals, those who are accused of war crimes, are punished as per international law. The next plan or the next agenda is to focus on ecocide, the environmental damage, the ecological damage that has happened because of the war. Ukraine is accusing Russia of committing a ecocide. Just like you have genocide, which is a mass killing of people, similarly Ukraine alleges that Russia has committed ecocide. Because of the war, ecology and environment has taken a very big hit. Right? So to deal with the environmental consequences, Ukraine wants a plan, and it wants Russia to pay for this. Next, Ukraine wants a Euro-Atlantic security architecture to be created. Ukraine wants a new security architecture to be created that covers the Europe-Atlantic region to prevent future wars from taking place. And finally, it wants a formal treaty. It wants a formal agreement to be signed between Russia and Ukraine calling for the end of the war. To end a war, it requires a treaty to be signed between the two parties. So Ukraine wants a formal treaty to be signed to end the war formally between Russia and Ukraine. So this is the 10-point peace plan that Zelenskyy has been pushing, and Ukraine has been urging global support from US, India and other countries to call for a global peace summit. Even though other countries may not be able to convince Russia, Ukraine is hoping that global pressure might convince Russia to come to the negotiating table and work out a possible solution. So that is why the topic is relevant, because India will play a big role in any such event. If such a negotiation were to take place, India would definitely play a role, because Ukraine is urging India to take part in this. Of course, Indian interests are involved here. India has been deeply affected by the war. The disruption in the global economy has hit India very badly. India has been forced to choose between Russia and the Western countries. So India has been facing a lot of challenges because of the war, and India would be more than happy to ensure that the war comes to an end. India has even called upon Russia to end this unnecessary war. So it's in this context that the 10-point peace plan becomes important, and any aspirant, any civil service aspirant should have basic awareness about this. Now coming to the third topic, we're going to take a look at Nepal. There has been a big political development in Nepal following the recent elections. In a previous session, we did speak about Nepal's elections, but the final results were not out and the next Prime Minister had not been chosen yet. So last week there has been a development here. There has been internal politics played out by different political parties, and finally Prachanda, or Pushpa Kamal Dahal, has emerged as the new leader of Nepal, the new Prime Minister of Nepal. So let's understand why this development is important from India's perspective. See, Prachanda, or also known as Pushpa Kamal Dahal, he is becoming the Prime Minister of the country for the third time. This is not the first time he is becoming the Prime Minister. This is the third term for Prachanda. Since Nepal transitioned from a monarchy to a constitutional secular republic, since then Prachanda has been the PM of the country for 3 terms. This would be his third term. I hope you know that at one point Nepal was a theological state. It was a Hindu state. It was also a monarchy until recently, until 2006. Following Nepal's civil war, Nepal transitioned into a democratic constitutional secular republic. Is that clear? This civil war in Nepal lasted between 1990s to 2005. For almost 10 to 15 years, Nepal was consumed by the civil war, which was led by the Maoists. The Maoists, who belong to left-wing extremist ideology, they had been leading a rebellion against the state of Nepal, the monarchy, which led to a civil war in the country. Is that clear? And Prachanda, the current PM, was the leader of the Maoist party at that point of time. He was a rebel leader. But in 2006, when Nepal transitioned from a monarchy to a constitutional democratic secular republic, Prachanda and his party, the Maoists, would also enter mainstream politics. And since then, the Communist Party of Nepal, which is headed by Prachanda, has been taking part in the regular electoral process. So Prachanda and his party, they have contested elections, won the elections as well, and he has become the Prime Minister for 2 terms already, and this would be his 3rd term right now. Now, why is this relevant for India? It is relevant for India because when the recent results were announced, when the election results came out, the Nepali Congress, the ruling coalition, was actually leading in the results. The ruling coalition was led by this party called Nepali Congress, which has historically been very close to India. India has fantastic relations with the Nepali Congress. So the previous government which was there was headed by Sher Bahadur Deuba. He was the Prime Minister until few days back. He was heading the Nepali Congress and they had formed a coalition. India has generally seen Nepali Congress as a friendly party, as a pro-India party, which protects Indian interests in Nepal. But at the last minute, Prachanda has changed his political alliance. Prachanda, who heads the Communist Party of Nepal, the former Maoist party, he was actually aligned with the Nepali Congress during the elections. When the election results came out, it was the ruling coalition which was in the front, which was leading in the results. They had just fallen short of a majority, and Nepali Congress and the Communist Party were supposed to form a coalition government. But at the last minute, this alliance broke apart because Prachanda started demanding the seat of the Prime Minister. Prachanda raised a demand that if he is made the Prime Minister, then the Communist Party would remain in this alliance with Nepali Congress. So Nepali Congress refused this deal, and hence Prachanda went to the other side, went to the other opposite party, which is the Communist Party of Nepal, Unified Marxist-Leninist. This is another communist faction in Nepal. This party, Unified Marxist-Leninist, it is headed by a very controversial leader, KP Oli. KP Oli has been the Prime Minister of Nepal for 2 terms already, and he has always been seen as a pro-China leader. He has been seen as someone who promotes anti-India sentiments, and India blames KP Oli for compromising India-Nepal relations. He's seen as someone who is working at the behest of China. So now Prachanda has broken the ruling coalition and he has gone to the opposition, and have stitched a new alliance with KP Oli, and hence Prachanda has emerged as the new leader of the country. So it's in this context that this development, this internal political development of Nepal becomes relevant for India. Because see, Nepal is this small Himalayan state which is sandwiched between India and China. Nepal shares borders with Tibet. Traditionally, India and Nepal have been very close to each other. Nepal had even sought India's protection at one point when China annexed Tibet with force. But over the last 30-40 years, a lot of differences have come up between India and Nepal, and India has often been accused of excessively interfering in Nepal's internal matters. There are accusations that India has meddled with the constitution-making process of Nepal. There are accusations that India has meddled frequently with Nepal's internal politics. The allegation is that sometimes India backs Nepali Congress. Sometimes we back the Maoist party. Sometimes we have backed the Unified Marxist-Leninists. And India keeps supporting the Madhesi community, the Madhesis from the Terai region, who are closely linked with India. Because the Madhesis of the Terai belt, they have familial relations in the border villages of UP and Bihar. So India often supports the Madhesis, their demands, and this leads to friction between India and Nepal. So India has often been accused of meddling excessively in Nepal, and leaders like KP Oli capitalize on it and they build anti-India sentiments. So for India, the best case scenario is to have parties like Nepali Congress in power, or even to have leaders like Prachanda in power who have been generally friendly towards India. But the problem arises for India when Prachanda and the Communist Party aligns with the other communist faction that is headed by KP Oli. India's fear is that this could provide space for China to exploit the political divide and expand its strategic influence. Let me just give you an example here. Let me just show you why India thinks that these concerns are real. When KP Oli was the Prime Minister between 2015 and 2016, then he again became the Prime Minister from 2018 to 2021. During this period, KP Oli took a number of steps that would compromise Indian interests. He would allow China to step up its military presence. He would allow Chinese companies to get involved in the telecom and internet infrastructure of Nepal. India sees this as a cybersecurity threat. During KP Oli's term, Nepal joined the Belt and Road Initiative of Nepal. This would bring China's railway networks and road lines from Tibet right next to India-Nepal border, which India sees as a strategic threat. Not only this, when KP Oli was the leader, he would revive the border dispute at Kala Pani and Susta and blow it out of proportion. See, India and Nepal have border issues. We have minor border disputes at Kala Pani and Susta. These are a relic of the colonial era. After the Anglo-Nepal War in 1830s, the Treaty of Sogoli had been signed. This was in 1834. The Treaty of Sugauli provided for the boundaries between the Kingdom of Nepal and British India. But this boundary was not scientifically drawn. There was always a doubt regarding the exact alignment of the border at Kalapani, which is today in Uttarakhand, and Susta near the Bihar border. Post-independence, that's post-1947, these disputes were actually minor issues. India and Nepal never escalated this because they had a very friendly and very close relationship. Right? In fact, India and Nepal have open borders between them. To promote our close cultural, economic relations, we have created open borders through the 1950 Treaty of Peace and Friendship. India and Nepal even extend national treatment to the citizens of each other. An Indian is treated as good as a Nepali citizen in the country, and vice versa. So that is the kind of close bonds that we have shared with Nepal, but leaders like KP Oli have tried to rupture this relationship. So because of these strong cordial relations, small disputes like Kalapani Susta never became a big issue in the India-Nepal relationship. But when KP Oli was the leader, especially in 2020 and in 2021, he would escalate the Kalapani dispute and turn this into a major issue between India and Nepal. India has these fears that leaders like KP Oli and his faction of the Communist Party are more aligned with China and are seen to be promoting Chinese interests, including Chinese investments in the hydropower sector. India has tried its best to execute hydropower projects in Nepal, but India has not been able to see much success, whereas China has made a lot of inroads in the hydropower sector of Nepal. Today, China is a major investor in the country executing critical infrastructure projects. So India sees itself to be falling behind and losing space to Chinese influence. So this is the concern for India. Now that Prachanda has aligned with KP Oli, India has a fear that it could give space for China to further escalate the border dispute, to step up its strategic influence and compromise India's interests. India is concerned about the West Sethi hydropower project, which was recently awarded by Nepal to India. The former government, the Nepali Congress government, had awarded this key project to India. But KP Oli, who was in opposition, had opposed this project. So there is a possibility that the project might be taken away from India and it could be given to a Chinese power company. So India's concern is that we might lose strategic space when such leaders come up who are seen to be aligned with China. This is the concern for India, but we need to wait and watch to see how things will develop between India and Nepal. But it's important to understand the significance of this development and what concerns does India have with regard to the political changes that have happened in Nepal. Now coming to the last topic for today, we shall take a look at Afghanistan. We shall specifically talk about how women are treated under Taliban's rule. This topic has been in the news over the last 2 months because recently Taliban has banned women from public spaces. Women have been prohibited from entering public spaces alone. They have been prohibited from higher education institutions. And Taliban is also placing restrictions on companies and NGOs from recruiting women who breach the strict dress code, which is imposed under the Sharia law. The idea is to discourage women from working, and Taliban is enforcing its orthodox laws and practices, which is leading to violation of gender rights and human rights. So here it becomes important to take a look at how Taliban has historically treated women. See, Taliban came to power for the first time in 1996. It toppled the then Afghan government during the Afghan civil war of 1990s and captured power and ruled Afghanistan, the then Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, until 2001. During this period, the Taliban, which was a radical political outfit, it would subscribe to radical versions of faith and it would try to enforce the strict Sharia, and Taliban would primarily target women in this regard. It would enforce a strict dress code on women. Those who would violate the dress code would be very strictly punished and penalized. Women would be prohibited from venturing out, traveling alone, or even going to schools, colleges, even being treated by doctors, everything would be prohibited by the Taliban. So when Taliban was in power for the first time between 1996 and 2001, large-scale violations had been committed against women and girl children. Even minor girls were not spared under the Taliban's rule. So the global community was deeply concerned back then about how Taliban was violating gender rights and human rights. Now these concerns have come back again. Because like I said, when Taliban was in power between 1996 and 2001, it not only enforced a strict dress code, but it would prohibit women and girl students from getting educated. There would be a prohibition on girl students entering schools and colleges. Women would be prohibited from higher education. They were prohibited from being treated by a male doctor. They couldn't travel alone unless they were accompanied by a male chaperone. Someone, a male family member should accompany them. For women to do any task, it should be approved by the male member of the family. So such orthodox restrictions were placed on women, which would violate their educational, economic and social rights, leading to the violation of human rights as well. Under Taliban's rule, mistreatment of women, rapes, molestation, domestic violence would all be ignored by the Taliban. Whereas a lot of restrictions and such penalties would be placed on women, and those who would violate them, they would be penalized with public flogging and even with execution. This is how women were treated by the Taliban during its first rule. So the fear was, when Taliban came back to power last year in 2021, there was a fear that we would see a repeat of the same. We would see a repeat of violation of gender rights and human rights. Initially, when Taliban captured power last year, Taliban tried to behave a little responsibly compared to the previous time in order to avoid the global pressure. Since Taliban was looking for global acceptance and global recognition, it promised to treat women respectfully and respect human rights and gender rights. But gradually, over the last 1 year, we have seen a repeat of the same. Step by step, Taliban has brought back the strict laws against women. It has not only brought back the dress code, but it is even targeting women, preventing them from gaining education. Girl students are prevented from entering schools. There is no women representative in the interim government. There is no women cabinet minister, and even the Ministry of Women Affairs has been abolished. So this basically takes away the political rights, the political participation rights of women in the country. And in the last 2 months itself, Taliban has taken a number of drastic steps. It has placed a ban on women working. It has prohibited women from entering public spaces like public baths, gyms or amusement parks, etc. It has prohibited women from higher education institutions, and it has even placed restrictions on companies and NGOs from recruiting women. Those women who are found to be violating the dress code, they will have to be removed by the company which has hired them. So this takes away their jobs, their livelihood. It affects their educational, economic and social rights and leads to large-scale violation of human rights as well. So this has again caused a lot of concern around the world, and the chief of UN Women, the UN Executive Director, has stated that all the progress that we had achieved in Afghanistan from 2001 to 2021, during these 20 years when we had a civilian government in Afghanistan, a lot of progress had been achieved with regard to women rights. All this progress has been nullified by the Taliban again. Ever since Taliban captured power, it has taken the country back by 20 years. It has erased all the gains that were done in the field of gender rights, and the UN Women has expressed deep concern about women rights in the coming years. So that is why this topic is very important, very relevant, because this will pose challenges for India as well. India has been reaching out to the Taliban. We have reopened our embassy, we have established diplomatic contact with Taliban. So as we get closer to Taliban, questions might come up on whether India should deal with the Taliban when it is violating human rights and gender rights on this scale. So it definitely has implications for India's approach towards Afghanistan and the Taliban government. So on this note, I would like to bring my discussion to an end. I hope it was a fruitful session. So do let me know how the session went by liking the video, share your comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.